Hello everyone, welcome back, and today we are going to discuss how to play the Nimzo-Indian Defense with the black pieces, and we are going to check it out by looking at the game which was played recently in Airthings Masters 2023, where total 8 players are playing the tournament, including the world champion Magnus Carlsen. Some of the players are Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura, Gukesh, Arjun, Sam Savin, Alreza Firuza, Wesley So, and Rauf Mamedov. So these are the 8 players who are playing the tournament, and today we are going to discuss the game played between Gukesh versus Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru Nakamura is playing with the black pieces, and the game is going to be very interesting, and it is going to be very helpful for those who wants to know what to play after white plays d4, c4, knight c3, how to continue the game, what is the right way to do it. So it's going to be fun, so let's check it out. So Gukesh with the white pieces starts out the game with 1 d4, and the common way and the standard way to play against d4 is to play knight to f6, c4, e6, and on the move number 3 we have the move knight to c3. There are mainly 2 moves here in this position, knight f3 and knight to c3, the most popular moves in the position. I usually go for playing knight to f3 in the position, but okay, knight c3 is recently becoming more and more popular. So basically the idea of knight c3 here is, if black continues with something like d5, as white have not committed the knight on f3, he can play a move like e3, bishop d3, knight e2, short castle, not putting the knight to f3, and now f3 e4 is the idea, and it can be very, very dangerous if you don't know how to react to it. That's the reason after knight c3 the standard way of playing the game here is bishop to b4, which was played by Nakamura. e3. So in this position there are many ways to continue the position. Queen c2, a3, even knight f3 is a move, a very standard move, e3, f3 even. So there are many moves to consider in this position. In the game we have e3 by Gukesh, short castle, and here e3, hitting the bishop, and now bishop is having the choice whether he can pull back or he can capture the knight. So Nakamura went for capturing the knight, pawn takes, and here we have c5 by black. So very standard way of playing. You develop the bishop first to bishop b4, because from here onwards the Nimzo-Indian starts or begin. e3, short castle, a3, takes, and here we have c5. So after c5, basically black is blocking the c pawns on c4 and c3, and if white tries to capture the pawn on c5, which is not a good move at all, black can continue with knight e6, and you can already sense 3 pawns on the same file. It's already very bad for black, and black is already better in this position. Black is going to capture the pawn, b6, bishop b7, or even bishop a6, putting pressure on the pawn on c4. So definitely here we have bishop to d3, keeping the pawn structure like this, so that if black captures, white can capture it back with the c pawn, making the pawn structure extremely fine. Definitely he's Nakamura, he's not going to capture it, and here we have knight to c6, developing the knight to e2, b6. So I hope that you guys have understood that the reason black didn't commit the pawn on d6 or d5, although black can commit the pawn on d6, but the reason black didn't commit the pawn on d5 is because black wants to keep the options open. Black can put the bishop on b7, which could be a very nice diagonal, but usually in this position when the c pawns are extremely blocked out, black puts the bishop on a6, knight on a5, putting the pressure on the pawn on c4, and that's the standard way of playing. So b6, e4 by Gukesh, trying to gain the center as much as possible, and in this position Nakamura went for the move knight to e8, which was a fine move. His plan was a bit interesting. A normal move could have been to play d6, which is also extremely fine move, not allowing white to play a move like e5, and the idea could be to play bishop a6, stuff like that. But we have knight to e8 by Nakamura, and here we have h4 by Gukesh, just pushing up the h pawn. I guess he wants to push his pawn to h6. So here we have e5 by Nakamura. So that's what was his idea was. So basically the idea of e5 in this position is, if white pushes up the pawn to hit the knight, black is going to move the knight on a5, and in this position, black is simply, the knight on e8 is going to simply jump on d6, bishop on a6, and going to capture the pawn on c4, and soon going to win the game. So that's the reason black went for the move knight e8. The idea was to play e5 and making a hole for the knight to go on d6. But definitely Gukesh saw it, and he went for the move h5, ignoring the threat and playing the pawn push. So white's idea in this position, he wants to play h6, and it looks like black can capture the pawn on d4 in this current position. So for example, if black captures it with e pawn, white is going to push the pawn. We have to play g6, or else capturing the pawn could be a very dangerous threat on the h5. So g6, pawn takes, and after pawn takes, bishop b2, you can already sense that the bishop can be humongously dangerous for black. After the d4 pawn collapses, the bishop is going to be enormously powerful. So that was the reason Nakamura went for the move d6. I personally feel at the place of playing d6, he could have went for the move h6, simply stopping white up from playing the move h6, and here black is already prepared to capture the pawn on d4, because once the bishop on b2 comes, now there is no g7 weakness, because the knight and the king is already protecting it, and the dark squares are no longer weak. So yeah, like after h6, I think what Nakamura thought was a move like g4, but it is not working because it could be simply met with cd, and after cd we have ed, and after something like bishop b2 capturing the pawn, we have queen f6, and like after bishop c2 we have a move like d6, extreme, okay, sorry about that, d6, and yeah, the basic point is now the white pawns are weak, and if you try to capture the pawn, here we have knight e5, and there are weaknesses, and black is extremely fine after bishop b7, this pawn is also hanging, stuff like that. So yeah, so basically what happened in the game was d6 was played in the game. Still the idea here is d5 is not a good move so much because of knight f5, bishop a6. Practically speaking, it's not good. You are having a weakness, you're defending with the white pieces, which is not a good idea. So d6, we have h6 by white, simply pushing up the pawn, g6, bishop to e3 by white, developing the bishop. And many of the players must be thinking, now can't white play a move like bishop to b2? Because if takes, it lead to the same position where the bishop is extremely strong. Guess in this position, as black haven't captured the pawn on d4 in this position, black is not liable to capture the pawn. So after bishop b2, black is not going to capture the pawn, and the bishop on b2 is going to be the bad bishop. And yeah, black simply continue with knight f5, bishop a6, and stuff like that, keeping the pawn on c3. So we have g6, bishop to e3 by white, and now knight to c5, knight to a5. The idea is to play bishop a6, put the pressure on the pawn on c4. Knight to g3, bishop to a6, queen to e2, defending the pawn. Pawn takes, knight to b3 now, hitting the rook and the pawn. Rook moved, pawn takes, knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen to b2, hitting the pawn, and now comes rook to c8, queen into d4. And in this position, the queen is well centralized, and your pieces, it looks like, what are you going to play in this position if I just give you this position randomly? So from Hikaru Nakamura's perspective, which was the best move which was played in the game, was like the white's queen is well centralized. We need to place our knight at a good square, but we also want to put our queen at a good square as well. So if you make a move like knight to c7, the idea is to play this, okay, it's going to be a mate in one. So he went for the move queen to f6, which was a very interesting move and very natural. You need to find such move because you're basically removing the threat, you're developing the piece, and if white captures the queen, knight takes, and the knight is well centralized, hitting the pawn on e4. So it was the most ideal move for the black, which was played by Nakamura. Knight to e2 was played by Gukesh, queen into, knight into, and now knight to f6 still, because the f6 square is a good square for the knight hitting the pawn. king comes, and here we have bishop into pawn. Many of the players must be thinking, can't why defend the pawn on c4 from by playing anything like a move like, for example, let's take a move like rook c1. In this position, guys, black can simply continue with knight into e4, bishop into e4, rook e8, and piece is lost. If you even try to protect it, f5, and the piece is lost, and black is still better in this position. So that's the reason king d2, he gave up the pawn. He have to, or else I should say f3 was played, d5, removing the isolated pawn, because in this position you can already sense black weakness is the d6 pawn and white weakness is the c4 pawn, because both the pawns are isolated. Black went for capturing the move, but basically black got this opportunity to remove his isolated pawn by pushing up the pawn, and now it's a connected pawn with the bishop. So pawn push. If you try to capture, it's still after knight into d5, bishop into d5, it's still better for black completely. But he pushed the pawn, bishop takes, king takes, knight d7, hitting this pawn. f4, defending the pawn, rook comes to c4, doubling the rooks on the c file. Knight moves, f6, removing this strong pawn. Pawn takes. If you try to push, it's not a good idea because of knight c5 check, and you lose this pawn. So you have to do something. You have to capture, or else there is no other option. And here comes the move, king to f7. Not capturing this pawn with the knight, which was also a fine move, but he thought that the c5 square is much a desirable square for the knight. So I think Nakamura decided to move the king, because it's the end game. You must use your king. Rook into c4, rook into c4, king to e3, knight to c5. As I said, the most desirable square for the knight. Rook comes, rook to a4, because you can't really defend the pawn. You have to give up the pawn, but not so soon. You're going to hit the pawn on a3, and takes, king comes, and we have a fourth rook to 8, which is a winning position for black. And now black king captures the pawn. g4, a5, pushing up the passed pawn, knight to d4, pawn push, pawn check, king move, knight to b5, knight to e6, king here because the pawn was hanging. And guys, here's my question. You can pause the video and you can find the move for black in this position, which was played by Nakamura and which was a winning move. So what are you going to play in this position from the black side? Okay, so all those who have came up with this idea, it's an impressive idea which was played by Nakamura. A bit of calculation, and that's all. Knight to c7. It's extremely winning move. You can't really capture the knight because of pawn push, and you can't really stop this pawn because from making the queen. You can't stop the square. You are a move late. Okay, so that's the point. Knight c7. You can't capture the knight. You have to move the knight, and now comes the move a3. b5 was also winning, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, the idea is basically you are going to push the a pawn, and then you're going to push the b pawn. So first a3, pawn push, takes, simply b5, knight move, knight to a6, covering the square, knight here, pawn push, king tries to come over here, but it's not going to happen. So after knight to c5, on the move number 48, Gukesh decides to resign the game. Okay, it's very simple, because if you try to hit the knight, for example, like this, black can still push the pawn, and if you try to capture, I'm going to simply push the pawn and I'm going to make queen. I'm going to make actually 2 queens, not 1, like this, and I'm going to make queen. You play something, I'll still make a queen. Okay, basically it's winning. So guys, so it was the game. It was an impressive game. I would say a very nice, well played game by Nakamura. No unusual moves, I would say. Capturing developing the bishop in the Nimzo, you castle, you take, you play the pawn to c5 so that to block the c pawns. You develop the knight, you push the pawn to b6 because the idea is to play bishop a6, knight f5. Here we have this knight e8, e5 idea, d6, h6 could also been a fine move, I guess. But okay, d6, he went for some other approaches, bishop a6, trying to defend it, but now he breaks the center with knight b3, takes. And this pawn is comparatively much weak, and this position is just better for black because white haven't castled yet because of he lost moves with this move h4 h5 h6. So I guess this idea of h4 h5 h6 wasn't well implemented by Gukesh, which resulted him in a loss. So yeah, so this was the game. I hope that you guys have liked it. If you did, then make sure to like the video. And if you're new to our channel, then make sure to subscribe to our channel and make sure to share this video with everyone so that who don't know how to play the Nimzo-Indian. I hope that they can identify how to play this opening. So if you did, then make sure to click the notification bell so that you will always get notified whenever I would be uploading new videos. So I'm going to see you soon. Till then, stay tuned and keep watching Oneshot Chess.